Hello and be welcome to another episode of Let's Develop with Maven in Eclipse. Nazish Assad, I hope I pronounced that correctly, asked me after I published my deployment episode whether and how it is possible to deploy Maven artifacts to a GitHub repository. And this is not strictly supported in the first place. There's a way you can achieve that by using GitHub's Site Maven plugin. And in this episode, I want to show you how this is done. Okay, so first of all, since we're going to use kind of a workaround way, we cannot directly deploy to the GitHub repository, which means that instead we're going to deploy to a local temporary or staging repository, which I'm going to call Let's Developer Staging, and then later deploy the files within the staging repository to the GitHub repository. And yeah, the URL for the local thing is of course a file, and I'm going to place that into the project's build directory below a path I'm going to call staging. Okay, so now if I hit deploy, can actually do that quickly, game loop deploy, Maven will place the deployment files within this staging directory. We can quickly have a look at that, refresh, and we have here a staging directory, and you can see that within that staging directory we have our 002 snapshot development version. Okay, next thing is actually already to set up the Site Maven plugin and the GitHub repository. So I'll switch over to GitHub quickly. I already created a repository which I call Maven repo. Essentially, you could also deploy to your project repository, but that means that you're going to check out all your deployed files or to at least download all the deployed files because they're in your Maven repository, which might blow up the repository size. So I'm not really sure what's the best way to do it. I never tried it so far, but for this demo, I created a dedicated repository, which I will use as the Maven repository. One word of warning: when I created the repository empty, it failed on me, so I had to create this initial scaffolding with a README. I guess any other file does as well, for the Site Maven plugin to work correctly. Okay, so let's set up the plugin. Under Build Plugins, I'm going to add the configuration of the new plugin. Plugin. Let me type that correctly. The plugin's group ID is com github github. The plugin's artifact ID, let me scroll down here so you guys can see that. Artifact ID is actually Site Maven plugin, and the version I found is 0.11. And then we need to add some configuration stuff here, which starts with selecting the output directory, which is the directory where the plugin is going to collect your artifacts from. As you remember from the staging or from the deployment configuration up here, this is that directory. I cannot include the file prefix because that fails to build the correct path, so I only copy the variable here and the staging suffix. Then I tell the plugin to include actually everything it finds in that directory. I say this is supposed to be deployed or committed to a repository owned by me. This is supposed to be committed to a repository named Maven repo. This is the one I just showed you that I created. then I want to put that on a branch, and for now I'm going to use the master branch, so refs heads master. And then I want to give it a commit message saying deploy artifacts for project version. Okay, and then, as you might have already guessed from the name, this plugin is intended to deploy a Maven site to repository, or to publish a Maven site to GitHub repository, not to publish artifacts, to deploy artifacts, which means that by default it executes on the Maven site lifecycle and not the Maven build lifecycle, which makes it necessary for us to configure an execution of the plugin manually, with the goals site being executed in the phase deploy. Okay, and that's actually already everything we need to set up the plugin, except that we have to provide the credentials for our GitHub account. As you might remember from my deployment episode, for deployment to some remote server, you need to configure credentials in order to authenticate against the server. And you don't want to specify that in your POM XML file, because then it will be word readable as soon as you publish your POM XML file. So instead, you configure credentials in the settings XML file. I'm not going to show that here in detail. You can look that up in my deployment episode. But in order for the Site Maven plugin to actually find your specified credentials, you have to tell the plugin via a property how which server ID you specified in the settings XML, and which it's supposed to use to authenticate against the server. And the property for this is called GitHub global server. And I just gave that server the ID GitHub. I already set that up. So with this configuration, we're actually ready to go. And I can risk running a deployment and see how that goes. Normal builds, testing, blah, blah, blah. We see some uploading stuff. And now we actually see the Site Maven plugin creating a number of what it's called blobs, and it's going to upload them to refs heads master. So now if I switch back to my Maven repository and refresh that, I should see a directory here which contains my release. Quite nice, huh? So the only thing that's left for us to do is actually reference that Maven repository, that GitHub Maven repository we just created from our dependent project. And this also works quite similar to referencing any other repository like I've showed you in past episodes, only that there's a special URL from GitHub to do that, which is https raw.github.com/your username, so let's developer in this case, then the repository name, which is Maven repo in my case, and then the branch name, in this case master. So now this will probably, where does this work? Should be 002 snapshot, right? Because that's the version actually deployed here. Yep, looks good. And just to make sure, I'm going to run this one here in test build to see if it can actually resolve the 002 snapshot, which looks quite good. You've seen the download here. Build was successful, so we successfully deployed our artifacts to a Maven repository and retrieved them from the GitHub repository. Resolved them from the GitHub repository to do build. Okay, I guess that's this part about how to deploy from a Maven project to GitHub repository. I hope, Nazish, this helps you. If so, please give me a thumbs up. Of course, everybody else is invited to give me a thumbs up too. If you have any comments, ideas about this, drop me a comment, send me a message, let me know what you think, and I hope to see you next time.